When thinking about citizenship, privacy, and autonomy, it is impossible for me not to dissect how identity and bodily markers influence how these three concepts interact with each other. So, when we think about the citizen, we also have to address the state, which Foucault does extensively through his genealogical analysis of the state and political sovereignty. So, Foucault is interested in liberalism and the governmentality that arises from that. There's a concern about governing too much, and the state must limit its own involvement. In spite of this, the state does get involved in a biopolitical approach to population, even though it is intent on respecting the individual, but it also needs to control and regulate things like hygiene and the birth rate, life expectancy, etc. So, in spite of this claim of the liberal government or the neoliberal government to not be concerned with governing too much, they want to step back and allow the individual to have his or her own rights. In spite of that, there are these active interventions and regulations and controls that do limit personal freedom. When we think of the citizen, at least from a US perspective, we may think of the citizen in the ways that the first Chris Hable's great quote does. Citizens have a relationship with the state. By consenting to be governed, a citizen legitimizes the state, and in return, the state offers certain protections and rights. And then Gray goes on to say that, this definition of citizenship is freeing from gender, race, and class-based criteria, and rather it focuses more on this idea of participation in the state, in the community, in the polis. But as Carl Holloway would argue, this is not necessarily true. Gendered and race conceptions of citizenship are always taking place, and these limit the ability of a citizen to have access to these particular rights, such as privacy and autonomy, and participation in the community. So furthermore, according to Holloway, the citizen is someone who is considered a private person. They have liberty and agency, and so they also have this idea of privacy and autonomy. Gray also goes on to mention that our political system is based on embodiment, and I think this is a point that he and Holloway would agree upon, that we need to look more at at bodies and how that influences the particularities of citizenship, although Gray is more interested in how cyborg bodies, and so how technoscience are changing our biological understandings of the body. We're no longer just organic, but there might be a mix of silicone as well. But then and then Carla Holloway would be interested specifically in how gendered and raced and class bodies are differentiated as citizens. But both of them would argue that we need to pay attention to how these particularities impact citizenship and regulations of the state. So then when we add Agamben to this mix of theory about citizenship, we see how the state no longer takes just the political body of the citizen as sort of its domain, but it also includes now biological life, and this is what Agamben refers to as bare life. The biological, the embodied existence of man now becomes part of the state's purview. So this bare life is particularly interesting in terms of this study because of the importance of the Homo sacer. So the Homo sacer for Agamben is this figure from historical archaic Roman law, but it's someone who may be killed and yet not sacrificed. So it's a human life that is simultaneously exists outside of the state and its regulations, but is produced by the state and its regulations at the same time. It has the capacity to be killed. There's not this political life to it. It is simply biological, survival, natural. And as such, it is also part of the state's regulation. So this Homo sacer is part of the state yet excluded from the state. If we think about the Homo sacer as a citizen, it's not really a citizen because it doesn't have access to the same privileges and rights, like to personal freedom, to privacy, to autonomy, that a citizen does in the particular state. But at the same time, it is also part of the state. So I think this is very interesting to look at in terms of what Holloway and Gray would say, for Gray in terms of cyborgs as a homo sacer, and then for Holloway, how certain gendered, race, classed, otherwise identified bodies are also part of this homo sacer figure. So the takeaway from citizenship theory that I think is most important is that citizenship has always been defined according to particular identity. So, white male landowners were the initial people who had voting rights in the United States, for example. So citizenship has always kind of relied on these exclusionary factors. But then, even in current conceptions of citizenship, it's important that we pay attention to the homo sackers in our midst. So, who are they? Like, what identity markers? Are they cyborgs? Are they particularly race or gendered individuals who are regulated unequally because of these markers? And then it's important to also recognize the types of disciplinary processes that the state powers use on these different citizens, whether they are citizens or if they are homo sackers, and once again, how that is configured.